Hello everybody, my name is UZO and welcome to Chefrican. I run UZO's Food Labs and I love food, and not just cooking food but about understanding flavors and taste. Today we're going to be tackling chicken. Chicken is a protein that we all eat pretty much every day of the week. However, we all get into a bit of a routine with our chicken dishes. So today I'm going to be making chicken YASA. Chicken YASA is a dish that is synonymous with Senegal and Gambia, but it is very familiar in terms of the flavor profiles to our Nigerian palate. So if you have picky eaters in your house, you're not going to have anybody turning their noses up. It has easy to access ingredients and it's pocket friendly as well. Let's get to it. Take your chicken and then pour it all over the chicken. To make chicken YASA, you will need the following things. You will need chicken, and I have here 8 pieces of chicken. Chicken YASA is an excellent way to get people to eat the unwanted parts of chicken. So if you've got a whole chicken, get it cut up into about 8 pieces and make sure it's cleaned and put it in a glass bowl. You're going to need onions. Chicken YASA gets a lot of its flavor from the caramelization of onions, and it might seem like an obscene amount of onions, but believe me, it is well worth it. You will need 5 large onions. Cut them up any which way that you like. I'm not too finicky, slice and dice it. Important thing is you need your 5 onions. You will also need lemon juice, freshly squeezed if you can. If you don't have the energy to get freshly squeezed lemon juice, buy bottles of good quality concentrate and then just use a little bit more than you would with fresh lemons, because obviously the taste is a little bit diluted. So half a cup of lemon juice to 8 pieces of chicken. You will also need olives, preferably with the pips out for obvious reasons. And then you'll also need to season your chicken with the king of spices. You need black pepper, and there's a reason why it's actually called the king of spices, but I'll save that for another time. Salt, bay leaves, thyme. I've got chilies here, and you can use any kind of pepper that you'd like. The Scotch bonnet peppers, you can use the yellow ones, you can use the red ones fresh. I'm using the green long chilies, which have a bit of a punch, but to reduce that effect, and because I really just want the flavor, I'm just going to cut the chilies into 2 and put it in the pot. And then I also have some ground yellow pepper, which gives a smoky flavor to the dish as well. We're going to be serving our chicken YASA with rice because it is a part of our diet, but you can do salads, you can do roast potatoes. But to make the rice a little bit more interesting, again, we eat rice all the time. I'm sure we all need a little bit of something extra to do to the rice. I'm going to be making almost like a pilaf and adding African basil or scent leaf or nchang or efere, whatever it is that you call in your dialect. It is that fragrant leaf that we typically add into pepper soup, and adding it to the rice just gives a little bit something extra. So, time to put everything together. Chicken YASA is also an excellent way to cook without really paying too much attention, and this is because you need to make a marinade for the chicken, and as we should know, the longer that proteins sit and marinate, the tastier that they become. So you can actually do this the night before. Just stick it in the fridge. Make sure that you cover your bowl with cling film to avoid contamination in your fridge. And then the next morning, just get to it. White rice is actually one of the most difficult things to make, and people will disagree with me. And the reason why I say that is because different brands of rice need to be cooked at different times. When I was just starting out in my kitchen life, I read that rice typically is cooked 1-to-1. So for 1 cup of rice, you add 1 cup of water, except that every time I did that, I always ended up adding more and more water, and it always frustrated me. So the moral of the story is, If you have a brand of rice that you like, stick with it, because the cooking times will be, you'll be used to the cooking times. If you change brands, you realize that your formula gets thrown off a little bit. So I've just added 2 cups of rice to 3 cups of water here with some salt, and then there's no shame in it. I'm going to be tasting as I go along until my rice is done. Now, on to making the marinade for the chicken. The big bowl with the ridiculous amount of onions. We are going to add all of the ingredients in here and then pour it over the chicken. So to start with, you need to add a little bit of oil, and you can use any kind of oil that you like. The flavorless oils are canola and vegetable oil, which you can use. You can use peanut oil, you can use coconut oil, but because of all of the flavors that are going in here, I prefer to use a bland, in fact, no flavor oil. And the reason you're adding oil is because the chicken can dry out in the oven. So just by adding a little bit of oil, you just avoid that step. So that was about 1/8 of a cup of vegetable oil. Then I'm going to add the lemons. Remember, the lemon juice is 1/2 cup of lemon juice. Remove the seeds or else you're going to have unhappy diners. And then going to add the seasoning. So remember those bird's eye chilies, the long green ones that we talked about? I have hands of asbestos, so I can do this without gloves, but please wear gloves or do it on a chopping board. And be sure that you don't put your hands in your eyes immediately, because the chicken yassa will be no fun. Then I'm adding the dried yellow pepper that I talked about earlier. Now season as you like. Now we on this end of the world, we like to season things, and so you use things like curry powder, you will use bay leaves and things like that. That's all well and good, but I think we need to learn how to tone it down a little bit so that the true flavors of food can actually come through. I've added a little bit of the black pepper, which is called the king of spices, and that is because many years ago, obviously, when Christopher Columbus was going around the world and trying to, discover new territories, he discovered black pepper in India. And it was so precious, obviously because the West didn't have it, that it actually became a form of currency. So black pepper was actually more valuable than gold, which is the reason why it's called the king of spices. So I've added that, and I've added a bit of salt. Again, it's easier to add a little bit than to take away. So you can always add, but you can't take away. I've added a little bit of thyme and crushed bay leaves, which I'm going to add just a little bit again. Okay, then you need to stir everything together carefully, because remember there are peppers in here. If this gets into your eyes, it will not be funny. Thoroughly mixed. Take your chicken and then pour it all over the chicken. Now, the use of lemon juice in the chicken yassa dish has 2 functions. First of all, it adds a little bit of tartness to the dish, but lemons actually tenderize. So here in these parts, I mean, it used to be that we didn't have too many plumped up chemically aided chickens, so the chickens and the fowls used to be really tough. So the lemons actually tenderize, and it breaks up the muscle so that you're not gnawing on the chicken and it's not coming off the bone. So it performs those 2 functions. And so once you've done this, try to coat the chicken with the marinade as best as you can. And then you need to stick this in the fridge. It needs to marinate in the fridge. Please don't leave your proteins out at room temperature, because salmonella and things will grow in there. And if you're going to be storing anything in the fridge, please cover with cling film, which I'm going to do right now. And try and make it as tight as possible, because again, there are onions in here. So if you don't make it too tight, everything from your breads and your cheeses are going to have an onion flavor. And then set that aside. It needs to marinate for at least 3 hours, but overnight is best. So before you go to bed, just throw these ingredients together and stick it in the fridge. rice is almost ready, so I'll just leave the leaf there, and then it's going to steam a little bit and also impart its flavor into the rice, and then let the rice dry up completely. So the reason why I will line my oven dishes with foil is because there is nothing worse than trying to scrape off burnt bits from this. So what I will do is, once we're done, just wrap and toss. I don't know about you, but I like to make my life very, very easy. So the chicken has browned. It's cooked kind of all the way through, but not quite. And that's not correct English, I know that, but you have to understand that it's brown on the outside, but it's not thoroughly cooked on the inside, and the cooking process will finish in the sauce. So in a large enough pot, get your pot going, and then oil. Again, peanut oil is what, peanut or groundnut oil is what is traditionally used to make it, but I prefer flavorless oils. So this is good old-fashioned vegetable oil. And then pour enough just to coat the pan, not too much, because remember you have oil in the marinade, and then if you cooked your chicken with the skin on, you already have some oil from the fat as well. Now, all of that lovely marinade, remember we talked about the obscene amount of onions, this is where the magic happens. Here in a bowl, I have just the marinade and the onions, and then as the oil heats up, we're going to add just the onions into the pan. Remember, you're going to need a slotted spoon of sorts because you're not going to pour the whole thing in. We're going to try to get just the onions first so that it can caramelize and lend its sweetness to the pan first of all. And then remember that the marinade sat in the fridge for well, at least 3 hours, but this sat in the fridge overnight, so it is chock full of flavor. You don't need to throw this away. So the pan should be a little bit hot now. Don't wait for the oil to get sizzling hot, because the onions will burn on impact. And remember that this is wet onions, as in sitting in liquid, so you also want to be very, very careful. So we have just enough heat to have a shh sound, hopefully. So here goes. Aha, there we go. Okay, so just make sure that you get as much of the onions drained. Don't add the liquid now. Again, we're trying to caramelize the onion so it gets a little bit of color. If you pour the liquid in, you're essentially just going to be boiling the onions. So it will get soft quite all right, but it won't have that nice color and do the caramelizing, which is when the onions actually impart sugars. So my slotted spoon can't get any more onions. It's not a science. That's fine. I'll just leave the rest of the onions away. It's not going to make or break the dish. The bottom line is most of the onions are in the pan. So I will turn up the heat now a little bit, and then you need to stir and stir and stir. Now while this is going on, now another thing with cooking as well is you have to be sure about keeping things consistent. So add all the onions, don't get distracted, add some of the onions and go away, because obviously you're going to have half-cooked onions here and there. So I'm going to cover the pot so that it can also steam just a little bit while I check on the rice. Again, it's very interesting that I've been cooking for such a long time, but rice scares me simply because all you need is to have added too much water and you have a disaster. So with clean hands, I will taste a grain of rice, and I realize that it's not yet cooked, but we're on track. Now our rice is almost ready, and it still has a little bit of water in there. This is the point where you add things to your rice, and the reason why is if you wait for all of the water or whatever stock it is you've used to dry up, then whatever you add in is going to be really, really raw. It's not going to have had a chance to cook a little bit, so you definitely need to cook it down a little bit, or else it's going to be too pungent. You take off the amount of leaves that you would like. So now I have enough of this. You don't want to overwhelm it. And I've got scissors. Make sure you have, snip it into little pieces. Again, when you're trying to introduce people to foods that they're probably not used to, it is very important that you are very sympathetic towards their taste buds. And the reason I say this is, if people are not used to having efirin in their rice or this scent leaf, and you don't cut it as fine as you possibly can, then the finicky eaters are not even going to touch it. But if you make it as fine as possible, then they're more likely to give it a go. So our rice is almost ready. So I'll just leave the leaf there, and then it's going to steam a little bit and also impart its flavor into the rice, and then let the rice dry up completely. And then once it's dry, give it a good stir through so it's evenly distributed, and then it's good to go. Now our onions. Everything just smells absolutely amazing here. Okay, so the onions have gotten transparent, and then they're frying away very happily here. So remember the rest of the marinade that we had. Remember, this had the herbs for the chicken. Some of the chicken flavor has gotten in here as well. It's got some oil, it's got the lemon juice. I'm going to add that to the onions now. And your cooking process is going to stop, obviously, because you're integrating a cold liquid into the hot onions. But then stir everything through. Now we're going to be adding the elements that make chicken yassa peculiar. And the first thing is the olives. Now these olives lend a certain tartness to the sauce, because remember, with this amount of onions, you're going to have a little bit of sweetness come through in the sauce. So you need something to balance it out. And that's what the olives are for. And that's what the next ingredient I'll add, which is the mustard, will add to it. Remember, remove the pips from your olives. And there are all sorts of interesting olive options now in stores that I've seen. If you go to deli sections of stores, you will see they'll have like Mexican style olives, which will have chilies. You have Italian style olives that have fresh herbs. Use whatever it is that makes sense for you. And then I'm adding Dijon mustard. Now there are different kinds of mustard in the market. Do not use the yellow kind you would use with hot dogs, because that's just basic. Dijon mustard has a little bit of complexity to the flavor, and it's a little bit more natural in terms of the mustard seeds. I mean, from the sunshine yellow color of the typical mustard, you have to know that that's not natural. So add about half a teaspoon of the Dijon mustard with the olives and the onions, and stir everything through. We need to add the baked chicken into our sauce. Now, quick tip, whenever you bake chicken, you have all of this lovely liquid in here. Don't throw it away. If you don't have any use for it immediately, put it in a little bowl, or you can, if you're having mashed potatoes or something like that, transfer this sauce into a smaller pot and then just cook it. It will reduce and form a gravy. If it doesn't thicken up, again, these cooking shows, they magically thicken. If they don't thicken for you, simply add a little bit of corn flour or all-purpose flour. Make sure you sieve the all-purpose flour and then just stir it very quickly, and you have a very thick sauce. So I'm adding the chicken in here, and you're going to leave the chicken in the sauce for at least 10 minutes. Just take the chicken. You want to get as much of the olives and the onions as possible. It's time to put everything together and plate. The easiest way to plate rice, and everybody can do this, is get a bowl of any size. Now there are all sorts of really fun square bowls and rectangular bowls. And once your rice is hot and moist, just scoop into the bowl. The trick is you have to make sure it's compact. So I'm going to scoop this in here, and you can see the rice has flecks of the African basil in here. Now, it's going to be pretty full, and remember, we're doing family style plating. So it's not individual portions, but it's really for people to dip their spoons in and maybe put on their own individual plates. So invest in a couple of really nice and interesting plates like this here. Rice compact. We're all going to say a prayer here. This is television, people. And then turn it over. Oh, yay. So there we have it. And then a little bit of our ephemera which we used here. I see these in magazines, it looks so cute. But again, people are just going to shove this away. Now, if you were doing this on individual plates, you can scoop individual sized portions like this and then have your YASA sauce around it. That could be one way to go. But I'm choosing to spoon the YASA into its own bowl so people can scoop as they go along. Scoop the chicken out first, just because it's really a lot easier to do this. Just take the chicken. Okay, now the beauty of this sauce again are the onions. So after you scooped out all the chicken, you want to get as much of the olives and the onions as possible onto the plate. So here we have it, my take on chicken YASA and a bit of a twist on plain white rice. You can serve this with any drink of your choice. You can add a sexy accent to water just by, you know, a lemon slice, and you have excess lemons from the chicken YASA. You can add some of your ephemera leaves in your water as well. If you're making some ice, you can actually put some ephemera or lemon pieces and top it with water and then use the ice cubes for a little interesting take on water. I'd love to hear from you. Please try this out and send me pictures as well. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.